Welcome to Chronic Curiosity. This episode, we are sitting down with Mike Manchak. He is the owner of Manchak Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Academy here in Worcester, Ohio. His last name is spelled Manchak. You can find them at mbjja.com, on Facebook, Manchak Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Academy, and on Instagram, Manchak_BJJ. This episode goes a tad long, so we're going to split them up and get the second part next week. But until then, enjoy. Good, yeah.
And I'm all about the sharing and the camaraderie that comes with the bourbons and the whiskeys.
Oh yeah. All right, I think we're all set.
We're good.
Ready?
Yep.
All right, and here we go. Mr. Mike Manchak.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So you are the, and we'll go down many paths, I'm sure, but the owner of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy here in Worcester.
Yeah.
Super cool. I'm really excited to talk about that. Tony made sure he lectured me to do some research on jiu-jitsu before you came, and I was like, I think I know just enough to sound like a real dumbass talking to someone like you. So that's my level of knowledge at that point. So, but we'll get into that too, and a bunch of other stuff I want to talk to you and ask you about. But
of course,
any I guess we could start with that. What the history on. How you got into that.
Yeah.
Because that's not like a path
it's not.
A path that many go down, and to be at the level you are is not a small feat.
Yeah, it's jiu-jitsu in general, it's got a real cult following, obviously. You know what I mean? If you're in the know, but for a lot of people it kind of gets a little bit lost nowadays with mixed martial arts and all the other martial arts. So it's either on one end you're like a woo martial artist, right, where you're breaking boards in your garage and learning how to like kill people with your chi, or you're a cage fighter on the other side. And I think it's just to backtrack, I guess, not to get off onto that, but I got into it. About probably at this point, it's been 13 or 14 years ago. I started at an MMA gym, and I was actually involved in the MMA side of things for probably about a year and a half. And then, the path kind of brought me down. The gym ended up closing its doors kind of abruptly, and I liked it so much. I mean, I loved combat sports, and I think, being a little kid, I remember one of my mom's boyfriends had all his biker friends over, and they had, I think it was UFC 3. They had ordered it on pay-per-view, and I remember sneaking out of my room and watching it and seeing this little guy in what looked like to me a karate uniform.
I was gonna say, did he come out in the bathrobe? Because that was my first memory too.
Yeah, he did. He came out. He wore the gi. Wore the gi out to the ring, fought in it, and destroyed everybody. And I mean, the rest is kind of history. And not to get it, I'm not a historian of jiu-jitsu or combat sports, but I know enough to really respect it. But
was it Hoist Gracie?
Was Hoist Gracie. It was, yes. Okay. With the Gracie train, they come out on each other's shoulders. But and I really kind of gravitated towards. I liked the grappling portion, obviously, a lot. I was never, I wrestled a little bit in middle school, but never really took it to heart or anything like that.
Because that's what I was wondering. It wasn't like a thing you were going through high school and wrestling, just kind of got back into it.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't much of an athlete in high school. I ran track and stuff. I played football, when I was younger. But once the MMA gym closed up, I sought out my actual formal jiu-jitsu training was in Akron with Eduardo. Eduardo Barros, I think I'm saying that right. Eduardo Barros, but the Brazilian pronunciations are a little different. I found him, and that was really like in my opinion, that was like the beginning of my journey, you know, because he's as legit as it gets. The Brazilian national champ. I mean, he had accolades, you name it, he had him. And he was at that time, he was one of very few actual black belts in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu around. So yeah, I started there, started training with him, and, you know, you know, I say martial arts. Every time I say martial arts, I don't know, I kind of feel weird saying it because, like I said, you kind of get lumped in with a lot of different things. And to me, it's, you know, it's so much more than that. But yeah, anyway, so I met Eduardo. I went and started training with him. And to this day, I mean, he's top tier. I have so much respect for him. And I trained with him up until I got my purple belt. And then I started training with one of his black belts, a guy named Matt Waterhouse. And I mean, I was training a lot. I was training like 7 days a week at that time. Yeah, and then from moving from Eduardo's to Matt's, I trained, got my black belt in 2017, the beginning of 2017, and yeah, it's, you know, I always say it's the most, it's probably the most rewarding thing I've done, you know, outside of, you know, having kids and married and everything. I say that really, you know, my wife wouldn't probably be happy with the way I'm talking about that. But
the most individualistic thing that you've done.
Yes.
I can appreciate what you're saying.
But yeah, it's the most rewarding, and at the same time, it's definitely the most demanding thing I've ever done. It's a very difficult path, that's for sure, but at the same time, it's really rewarding. It's not, and it's different than most martial arts where you see, you know, there's no 10-year-old black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's for sure. I mean, there's definitely, like, you know, there's youth that does it, but to be a black belt, there's certain like baseline credentials. Like, you have to be at least 18 years old, and you know, if you're a black belt, you know, there's an exception, obviously. I mean, there's a couple knuckleheads out there, but if you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt with an actual lineage that checks out, I mean, it's legit. You know?
Right. So there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. I know. I was trying to, like, how do I keep this in?
Yeah. I guess that's part of some of the, for a lot of people that don't understand, and this is just me kind of summarizing it.
Yeah.
What I know, like I said, make myself look like a dumbass. So, you know, particularly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is essentially, you know, grappling and kind of like a mix of grappling and wrestling in submission holds. It's not, you know, impact. It's not, you're not kicking each other in the face and stuff like that. So it's a little different than a lot of martial arts.
Yes.
As it were. There's no striking.
Yes.
So you talked about, you know, being a black belt, you know, so it takes, you know, close to 10 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and then you talked about the lineage too. So
Yes.
I had a lot of questions, like, so the lineage piece of it is, from my understanding, you have to actually be able to trace, you know, the people you trained under all the way back to, is like Japan? Because is it is it just the Brazilian part of it? Because it didn't originally come out of Japan. Like, so there's so much there that I don't think a lot of people understand. Like, they look at martial arts and karate and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, Karate Kid, yeah, I know, yeah, I get it." Like, you're just out there in bathrobes and you're doing stuff. But that's not what it is.
Yeah, you're right too, and it is. So I think that is one thing, you know, that sets Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu apart from a lot of other martial arts, where I can trace my lineage back to essentially the source. And that was I always took a lot of pride. And I think anybody that's a black belt, that's a legitimate black belt, takes a lot of pride in who gave them their black belt, and so on and so forth, who gave them their black belt. Yeah, and you could technically trace it all the way back to Japan. You know, on my website, I make sure I I have my lineage on there for sure, but I stop at Carlos Gracie. You could go farther than that. You could go to Maeda or Kano. Some of the other that list starts getting long. At the same time, it starts getting a little fuzzy.
Right.
And so, for me, where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu started was in Brazil. You know what I mean? And there are still practitioners that practice, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and all due respect to them, but it's a little different. It's
now, does that involve striking?
Yeah,
or is it how is it different?
Beats me. I hate to say that, but I would say the thing that really separates a lot of these martial arts is in judo they call it randori, but it's the sparring aspect. It's the sparring and the competition aspect. Is it tested? Can you do it against an opponent going full go?
Gotcha.
And that's where jiu-jitsu, and not even in my opinion, it's been proven time and time and time and time again. That's where jiu-jitsu separates itself. If you go into, most, and not all, there's definitely some traditional martial arts. And I say traditional meaning like karate, taekwondo. Those are the two that stick out. Yeah, even judo, you could put that in there. But there's very little emphasis on the sparring aspect, and we call it rolling. But I think that's what separates. It's the practicality of it.
It's applicable.
That's a very it's a nice part of it. But yeah, and that's the thing. Like I can take anybody that walks off the street and comes through the doors. If they want to roll, we can do it. I don't, it's not like you see those like phony martial arts videos online and they're like, well, I can't, I don't want to train with you or I'd kill you with these moves. You know what I mean?
Well, you should be able to control yourself enough, right?
Yeah. But yeah, and I think a lot of people, especially people that aren't in this, heavily involved in the sport, the Gracie family, which is, everybody that does jiu-jitsu nowadays owes a lot to them because, you could argue that they owe everything to them because they really brought the art to the forefront. And to be honest, the jiu-jitsu as we know it today, it's all because of that family and their contributions to make the sport what it is. And I think that's what a lot of people, it's easy to get mixed up because, you have sports like judo, which if you look at it on face value, it looks very similar to what we do. We wear very similar uniforms. But in traditional judo, you have, they call it niwaza, which is, it's the ground aspect of judo. And I think it was in I want to say the 1920s. They started altering the rules of judo to make it more, well, there's a whole backstory with that, but they altered the rules to have less emphasis on the ground aspect of the sport and more emphasis on the stand-up. And a lot of that stemmed from, it was actually, from my understanding, it was a cultural thing. And they did it for a lot of different reasons. Mainly, there was this thought that the ground was dirty, and if you're rolling around on the ground, you're not proper, you're not a gentleman per se. And they made adjustments to the rules over the years that since, like I said, the 1920s or so, that kind of it pushed judo into this very specific, very I would say in some regard a watered down version of what it used to be. Now there are very, very, very tough judo practitioners nowadays, and you'd be hard pressed if somebody's a black belt in judo. It's the same. The timeline, how long it takes to get your black belt in judo is not as long as jiu-jitsu. I don't know. There's no other martial art that it takes as long to get your black belt. It took me 9 years to get my black belt, and that was a lot of training. Now I took some time. It seems
pretty
off.
Quick from everything that I've kind of seen. That's pretty efficient. Maybe not quick, efficient.
Yeah.
I don't want to discount it.
No. I always felt like I kind of had a knack for it. And then, yeah, but on average, it takes at the least usually 10 years to get your black belt, unless you're like a very specific, there's anomalies in every sport, you know what I mean? Where like he's a big exception to the rule. But, yeah.
It's kind of like the Gracies were probably an exception to the rule.
Yeah. And to be fair, the Gracies took, judo or as a lot of them, is what we refer to as Jiu Jitsu, and they molded it, and there was more of a focus on the ground aspect. And really for them, it was a focus on practicality. Not so much conforming to a rule set, or anything like that. I mean, you can see it right off the bat when you look at the early UFCs when Hoist went in there. There was no rule against like not being able to punch Hoist because he was wearing a gi or because he knew jiu-jitsu. And jiu-jitsu was still effective. I mean, it just shows how powerful the martial art is.
Like when you mentioned, the first influences, I remember watching, UFC when I was younger, and you see this dude coming out looking like he just like walked off of like a porn set with the mustache.
Yeah.
And then he's got this bathrobe on. I'm like, I'm like, who are these guys? Like, and then all of a sudden they get put in the ring with this dude. You're like, well, this guy's going to get smeared. Right. Karate Kid out here thinking he's a badass. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh.
Yeah, he's unconscious.
Oh, that guy is a badass. Like, and he didn't even hit him once. Like,
it's amazing.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
Like, I've heard it, kind of described as the, the chess of fighting.
Yeah.
And so that I guess that's what kind of got me really interested and really excited to talk to you about it, because it's like there's so many kind of different aspects of jiu-jitsu from what I've seen, compared to different fighting, where it almost seems like just as much of a mental game, if not more of a mental game than a physical game.
Absolutely. So yeah, I always tell people, new students that come in, it's funny because I probably, everybody I talk to about coming to train, they, it's always a couple things that everybody has. It's always like I got to get in better shape before I come in. And you wouldn't do that anywhere else. Like I got to get in shape before I go to the gym or anything.
For, right?
Yeah, and it is. And I always tell them, I never discredit somebody wanting to get in better shape. Because in anything you do, you want to be the best version of yourself. You know what I mean? So no matter what you're doing, whether you're doing jiu-jitsu or any sport or any pastime, I mean, I'm a hard charger. I like to, everything I do it, 120%, in a very, very focused way. But I think, jiu-jitsu it's a very technical sport. It is definitely chess. But what I always tell people after they come in, and it's everybody, there's always a resounding the same conclusion everybody comes to after they've been coming for, a couple weeks or so. It's the fraternity that you didn't know you needed. And nowadays it's so hard to find something like that. And I think that's why, people gravitate towards, CrossFit or whatever pastime you're into. It's nice to feel like it's somewhere where you can really belong, and there's a camaraderie, and your teammates over the years. I mean, all my teammates now, especially all my guys, since I've grown my school a little bit. I mean, everybody that's in there training with me is like a brother to me. They I have their back no matter what, and there's very few things in life where you can really go and just, you can forget about the world for a couple hours. And I was just talking about this today, but especially with the chaos in the world right now, on every level, you know what I mean? Culturally, everything like that. But I was just saying, like, I don't know any of the political leanings of anybody that I train with. And I know them very, very well.
I don't care.
And I don't want to know exactly right. Because we're, and I think it speaks to human nature in general. Like, I think society could use more of that. And at the end of the day, like, if I can do anything to help anything. I mean, if I can contribute to that part of it, I'm doing something right. But it's kind of like an afterthought. We're doing jiu-jitsu first, then you get all that stuff on the back end, you know.
And then you realize it happened. Well, that's, you know, it's funny. Tony and I, we've talked about this. I mean, more times than we've ever talked about it in the past month and a half doing this here. And, you know, talking about just seeing people, and the more conversations we have with people, it's just, you realize that, you know, I don't know if it was technology or the internets or, you know, whatever, you know, whatever it is. Yeah. I mean, he's just like I did Walmart's. Yeah, the internet.
I heard that pluralization.
Yeah, that was on purpose. That was on purpose. Yeah. But it's the internet is becoming just as ridiculous as the Walmart's. You know, so like, and there's just no more true face value there. Yeah, you know, and so we've had that discussion a ton of times where it's like I feel like people just need something. They're so disconnected.
They do.
We feel like we're so connected because we're able to pick up our phone and go, oh, I'm connected to you now. Like, I see what you're doing. Yeah. In their 30-second clip, whatever. But maybe that's why everyone hates somebody so much.
I would completely agree too. And it's and even more so, you know, I think a lot of people's version of themselves on the internet is not completely who they actually are. You know, and whether that's good or bad, more often than not, it's not good. But but I think you know, something like what I do, it's very pure. You know, and there's no. It's. I mean, politics can come, and not politics meaning actual politics, but the politics of jiu-jitsu are they're still there. I mean, I've had to deal with it through my journey. I mean, there's little spats you get in with different people, and like, you know, misunderstandings and stuff like that. It's kind of human nature, but at the same time, it's there's so much easier to resolve, you know, with something like we said, like with that face value, and we're all there for the same thing. And I think, as a coach and as a, you know, as a business owner, it's always, I think that's the biggest responsibility I have, over, you know, being a good instructor, over producing good athletes. It's fostering a good environment where people feel comfortable to come in and look forward to coming to class. Because I remember, you know, when I first started coming to jiu-jitsu, it was like, that was all I thought about. I mean, that was all I looked forward to all day. And I see that, like, that spark in people. And I tell you what, there's days where I'm like, man, you know, like, I'm tired, you know, I worked all day and now I got to go, you know what I mean? Now I got to go teach. And it's all washed away within like the first 2 minutes of me walking through those doors. And it's just, it's so important to create an environment like that. And like I said, even more so nowadays. I mean, it's really important to have something like that. And I take a lot of pride in that. I really do. No, more so than anything, you know? And
you talk about the camaraderie thing too. I think it's a couple of the comments you mentioned kind of made me think of something I heard. It was someone talking about when they were younger, you know, they grew up in a terrible household, and, you know, they were poor, you know, basically did everything they could just to be presentable for school. Right. You know, abusive father and this, that, and everything. And, you know, they would go to school and then they would see the kid sitting next to them and they seemed happy and, you know, they got nice clothes on or whatever. And, you know, they would compare themselves to that person's image. They didn't know what was going on in that kid's life. They didn't know anything, but they looked at him like, well, that kid must be happier than me because I know what I'm going through. And he doesn't look like he's going through that. So that, like, and it kind of go into the, you know, being able to resolve, you know, kind of some of those conflicts with jiu-jitsu and the what it is. It just seems like you could get in there and just, even if you almost get to know somebody through playing that chess game with them.
Absolutely.
And it's just pure, like you said. It seems so awesome. Like the environment from everybody I've heard that's done it, and you know, it's a different kind of
I'm always preaching the gospel of jiu-jitsu. It's you know, it's a powerful thing, and it's weird because I think jiu-jitsu, modern Brazilian jiu-jitsu, we've retained all the classic martial arts undertones, right? We have a tremendous amount of respect for, the academy, the mat, your training partners. It is a sacred place for a lot of people. But I think it's even more powerful because none of it's forced. Like when you walk into my class, you don't have to bow. We don't have to, be silent when I'm talking. You don't have to address me as sensei. Some academies kind of lean on that a little bit more. It's like anything. There's a specific terms for everything. Like a gym's called an academy rather than a dojo, and an instructor's called a professor. But I've never gravitated towards those terms at all, and I never really felt comfortable anybody calling me professor. I've had people call me professor, even coach. It's like, okay, you know what I mean?
Because is there a reason for that? Like, is there the deviation and I understand the origination of sensei and those kind of from the origination back in the day, whatever. But what's the deviation?
That's a great question. So there is a specific reason for the deviation. It's and everybody will, most people in general will say, it's all like when jiu-jitsu left Japan. So Japanese culture, we're all familiar with Japanese culture for the most part, at least on the surface. When jiu-jitsu came to Brazil, it got meshed with surf culture. So it was a lot less about all those rigid, structured, things that were, ingrained in the sport. And it wasn't even a sport then. It was a martial art. You know what I mean? But the culture of Brazil influenced what Brazilian jiu-jitsu became. And it sounds kind of silly because of course it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu. That's what we call it now. Right. But I think it's a big reason why Brazilian jiu-jitsu gyms are laid back and they're not run like traditional martial arts academies. But all the same things are there. You know what I mean? You don't have to bow to me to show me respect. You show me respect by showing up every day, by putting in the time. I can see it. I don't need a validation, you calling me sensei or anything like that. You can call me Mike, you know what I mean? Call me whatever, But yeah, to answer your question, like I said, surf culture in Brazil, and I would say Brazilian culture in general really influenced how it disseminated from Brazil and how it spread across the world. And there's a bunch of great podcasts about this type of topic. There's a guy named Robert Drysdale who's actually making a documentary right now. It's in the process of getting finished. It's going to be called Close Guard, but he dives into kind of the past of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the origins and how it kind of morphed over the years into what it is today. But yeah, I would say, that's what we owe to the Brazilians as far as, we owe a lot to the Brazilians with this sport. I still call it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's a little bit of a movement nowadays to kind of like nationalize it. There's a couple guys that want to call it American Jiu-Jitsu because there's a lot of really good, really talented practitioners that are coming out of America. And not to get too deep in the weeds, but there has been more of an emphasis on certain styles now that it's.
I would say, is it changing?
It has changed. But there's been a little bit of a shift in jiu-jitsu styles. There's more focus on leg locks. There's more focus on incorporating more wrestling into the game, which is kind of, more wrestling makes sense because we're such a wrestling heavy culture around here. It makes sense for us.
Now, I heard something about that recently.
Yeah.
In passing, I just caught it, and just that you said it brought it up.
Yeah.
They were talking about the more leg lock stuff and how, I didn't quite understand it all. But essentially that
it's shop talk with a lot of that stuff.
But I did catch up on they were talking about it's how there's a lot that's moving to more leg lock stuff and how the different advantages and this, that, whatever. But then somebody made the comment of, well, do you think after a long enough time that it's going to go back flipping around? Because, all right, well, people don't have a good defense system for, these leg lock maneuvers and stuff and these different things. So then you start learning that and then it sways one way and then it'll come back or turn into something else.
That's spot on. It really is. I mean, a lot of these things, and you see it if you're an MMA fan at all. You see these cycles of champions, and it's a really good indicator of how the sport progresses and how it changes and how it adapts. And at one point you'll have all the UFC champions will be former collegiate wrestlers. You know what I mean? And then at another point, all, champions will be, K1 champions, or Muay Thai champions. And it morphs like that. But you're spot on. Like jiu-jitsu, I think the current state of jiu-jitsu, leg locks are hot right now. And I think there's a lot of promotions that allow a specific rule set, and not super specific. Basically, they go a longer time limit, and there's no point system. So it's submission only. So whoever submits the other guy wins.
Okay.
And that lends itself to leg locks a little more. And like I said, not to get in the weeds too much with it, but you're exactly right. I think it will circle back around. I think as the sport kind of changes and more practitioners adopt this leg lock system, there's a couple really strong club. First and foremost, it's the Danaher Death Squad out of New York, Renzo Gracie's academy. There's an offshoot of that, a guy named John Danaher, and he's kind of responsible for this big boom. Some like standout guy, Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonin, his brother Nicky Ryan, a lot of that. I mean, those guys kind of spearheaded it. A lot of people don't like it. I mean, it's kind of like we're a little bit divided on the jiu-jitsu front. They don't like it because Gordon's a personality, kind of like the Conor McGregor of our sport.
Okay, enough said.
So love him or hate him, though. I mean,
but if he whoops your ass, he whoops your ass.
I tell you what, man, he's got some of the most beautiful jiu-jitsu out there. I mean, I have my own personal favorite practitioners. I love Rafa Mendez. I mean, first and foremost, Gordon's great to watch. But a lot of the more traditional jiu-jitsu guys, they don't like all the disrespect, because Gordon talks a lot of shit. I mean, he really does. But I will say he's probably the highest paid jiu-jitsu guy out there, because he makes people tune in,
Right.
Like you want to tune in. It's like the Floyd Mayweather effect, people tune in they want to see him get beat.
Yeah,
and he's good. You know what I mean? More so than they want to see him succeed. But yeah,
it's kind of like John Jones with the UFC. Like,
yes,
it's like, man, I really want to dislike that guy, but it is.
How can you argue?
It is beautiful watching him fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a freak. I mean, yeah. What a time! What a time for the sport. There's a lot. So
it sounds like you just need to find out what's next.
Yeah,
then to be the next guy, right?
That's the ultimate question. Yeah, well, it's weird too, because I will say the leg locks have gotten hot lately, but they're not new.
Right.
They've been around for a long time, and most people that are in the sport have a good understanding of what it is. Now there's new things that come out all the time, but at its core, it's already been done. It really has. I mean, none of the stuff is new, and even on the new positions and the popular positions that they get brought in, they've probably been done, 1,000 years ago by somebody.
Well, you can only do so much with your body.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, and that's what I love about the sport too, because I mean, it is. I mean, at its core, it's probably one of the most ancient sports ever. It's grappling. It's wrestling. You know what I mean? It's
yeah. You did that before weapons were ever a thing.
Exactly. And I think as long as mankind's been around and people have had blood and testosterone in their veins, like this has been a part of our culture ever since. And I think that's, at the same time, it's probably the same thing that draws people to this sport, because there is something, I think, innate that we all have that kind of makes you gravitate towards that. And especially nowadays, it's amazing, because all this talk you have about toxic masculinity and stuff like that. I tell you what, in a sport where it's probably one of the most overt masculine sports out there, you know what I mean? You're trying to choke somebody unconscious or break a limb. I mean, on its surface, it's like, what a barbaric thing to do. But I will say, I mean, you leave class and any little ounce of masculinity you have is probably gone. It's the ultimate ego check. You can't walk in there. I remember when I first started, and I was like, well, I'm probably at least like purple belt level. I could probably tap all it. No, it's still the same. I got beat by a white belt, and it was like the other guy's like second week, and it's just part of it. And I think more, especially nowadays with, like I said, not to get too far into it, but the way all the cultural turmoil is, and I think more, especially men, I think women have a place in this sport. I respect everybody that walks through my door. That's a girl, and then that there's a growing number of girls that get in our sport that excel, and I love it. I love to see it, and they're exactly the same. I've been beaten up. Oh my gosh, when I was coming up, there was a girl that was a purple belt, and she used to whoop my, it was so bad. It was so bad. And I tell you what a way to check your own ego. You know what I mean? I mean, it's fascinating to see, but I guess it's, after you do jiu-jitsu and after you learn jiu-jitsu, especially jiu-jitsu, I mean, any combat sport, but jiu-jitsu is like kind of the, I'm a little biased, but it's the ultimate, it's the ultimate ego check, because it's, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of guys, walk around nowadays thinking they know how to handle themselves in a bad situation. And it's so funny. You read it all the time. They're like, if I got my hands on this person, I would, bring hellfire down on them. And it's like, why would you think that? Like, you have something else in your head that, like, my mentality, bro. It's my mentality. But it's all the same, you know what I mean? And it's a fascinating change you'll see when people start training. I always call it's a bell curve. When you start training jiu-jitsu, you don't know what you don't know. So you're just going, you know what I mean? And then you get humbled very, very quickly. And then it starts going to, you don't know what you don't know, and then you start understanding what you don't know, and it's terrifying. You're like, oh, I just got beat by a person that weighs 80 pounds less than me, and I don't know, where does the sport even, you know what I mean?
How am I supposed to learn how
exactly.
to do that?
And then in a long enough timeline, you kind of arrive back at where you started, but you don't know what you know. You've done it for so long,
right, that
you're kind of prepared for anything. So it's the ultimate, I mean, in my humble opinion, it's the ultimate martial art. It's the ultimate form of self-defense. And Joe Rogan, I mean, he's a great ambassador for our sport. It really is. I mean, with his reach nowadays, right, and kind of putting it out there, I've had more people come in because of him. It's really great. And I mean, I've been in the sport a long time before Joe Rogan's been preaching it, for sure. But I think that was right around like 2013 or so when he really started growing his podcast and it really came into the fold. Yeah. But yeah, he just had Lex on like a few episodes ago, and it was interesting because Lex was asking him, he was kind of getting in the weeds about jiu-jitsu a little bit, and I like hearing somebody at that celebrity level now, like what he thinks about some of this stuff. But he asked him, and I get this question a lot, what's better for self-defense? Is it A or B? You know, and it's always jiu-jitsu or this. You know what I mean? And in that particular sense, it was jiu-jitsu or Krav Maga. And if you're familiar with Krav Maga at all, it's an Israeli, it's actually a military hand-to-hand combat, a form of hand-to-hand combat, which I have a lot of respect for. I actually took 2 classes long time ago. And not that that's anything to like give me a, you know, wow, so I can talk about it.
Well, I've never taken a jiu-jitsu class.
Yeah.
So
no.
You know more about that than I know about shit.
But it's weird because it's I feel like people always have this, it's almost like a conversation on paper where it's like, well, jiu-jitsu has no strikes. And Krav Maga teaches you how to like bite and you punch and kick people in the balls and like, you know, and to like really to do these like quote unquote forbidden techniques. And it's always those arguments, and I thought Joe was kind of alluding to this, and he kind of got around to it in a very Joe Rogan way. He doesn't pull money punches when he talks about that kind of stuff, but those conversations are always presented by people that haven't trained, because I always tell people, and I always ask everybody that comes and trains with us, you know, in the middle of that roll, because we roll pretty hard, we do. It's you know, it's not. We're not. It's not a leisurely roll usually. I mean, it's pretty serious. But I always ask them, and I've had this. I mean, that's a different story. But you know, if this guy started punching you in any part of that roll, or just decided like change the rules, I can bite you now. You know what I mean? Or I can kick you. Like, do you think it would change it drastically? Do you think everything would change? And the answer is always no, because it's at its core, jiu-jitsu is about control, and that's why I always say it's the ultimate form of self-defense, because it's all about de-escalation. Can you de-escalate the situation? And with jiu-jitsu, that's our whole focus. It's complete control of the situation. And I always say that, and I've said it. I mean, obviously I haven't talked to you guys about it before, but anybody that listens to this will be like, oh, he's saying it again. But the reason I say that is because with any other, you know, martial art or form of self-defense, at some point you have to decide, this is a fight now. I have to go, you know. So whether you're a Muay Thai champion, at some point you have to make that decision in your head to kick this guy in the head. Right. You know what I mean? So, you know, at some point you're done de-escalating. It's an escalation. With jiu-jitsu, at any point I can de-escalate this situation. You know what I mean? Hey, stop. I don't want to do this. And it escalates. Hey, okay. All right, you're a little close to me. Back up. Okay. It escalates. Now, any other martial art, it'd be like, okay, bang. You know what I mean? Just like every bar story.
You have to be the aggressor at
exactly.
some point.
But jiu-jitsu, let's say, you know, and even when you start talking about like the wrestling portion of jiu-jitsu, which is a very, very important. The stand-up portion is very important, but even more so, the guard is where that's our cornerstone for everything. So if you find yourself, our sport begins when you're in probably the worst position you could be on your back with somebody else that's an aggressor that's trying to hurt you on top. And that's where my world begins. And that's the most...
And that's the worst spot you could be at.
Absolutely.
So
and that's, you're in my world, you know what I mean? And it's great because, you know, having control over those situations, and it's just, it's hard to argue against it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's the ultimate, you're defending yourself the whole time.
Right.
And it'd be hard pressed to get hurt when you're in those situations if you know what you're doing.
Well, it makes sense because it's like like you said, the ultimate de-escalation is the whole time you're trying to pacify your opponent. I mean, you're just trying to put him to sleep. You're not trying to, or maybe break a bone.
Yeah. Well, you're trying to disable them.
Right. You're not trying to knock them out with force that could cause brain damage. You're not trying to break their nose. You're not trying to kick them in the balls or whatever. But I think that's what kind of started making me fascinated with it. It's understanding that it's not, it's not just somebody out there going and and dropping elbows on people's faces, which is cool sometimes too to watch.
Yeah.
I would want.
No, it's fair. I love it. I love it. I love MMA.
Yeah, like I don't want someone dropping an elbow on my face, but it's cool to watch sometimes. But
Very
you know,
cool.
the jiu-jitsu piece of it, even if you're not going into to compete, which, as I understand, you obviously have done and have done quite well for yourself. Even if you're not going to do that, there is a certain level of like discipline and in it. And I'm gonna take a little side jog here.
No, go ahead.
It kind of reminds me a lot of the intricacies of like baseball. People think, well, baseball is just you hit the ball, you throw it around. But when you understand, like because I didn't understand baseball for a long time,
right,
until I was probably younger 20s and I started getting into it a little bit. And
see
realized
how deep the rabbit hole goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I started like playing softball with a church group or something. And I started watching baseball, and then I hear him talking about stuff. And to hear like the managers, they're talking about, well, you know, this pitcher against this team on these batters on these days and this and on this town and like and all the and you realize that those 9 dudes on the field, they're not just out there just like, oh, well, if it comes my way, I'll try to catch it. You know,
right?
Like there's so much that goes into it. Like with jiu-jitsu, it seems like it's just that, like I said, that chess game, but it's so personable where it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
That's the part. It's just kind of fascinating. And if you just want to do it, I can imagine that would be a hell of a workout.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know, and that's why I always like the people that, you know, they're first starting out, they're always just like, you know, they're either I've had probably every couple of weeks we have somebody, you know, lose their lunch, you know, either
that'd be me for
either
sure.
out the door or on the, you know, hopefully not on the mat, you know what I mean? But it's happened quite a few times.
I'll give you at least a minute. I know it's coming.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a fascinating sport to say the least. It's you know, it's the only, I will say it's probably the only modern sport where, especially with all things included, whether it be mixed martial arts or wrestling or any of those things that are close. It's the only modern combat sport that in major competitions there's an absolute division. And for the people that don't know, absolute division means it's an open weight class. There's no weight class.
Oh, okay.
It's a 320-pound guy can fight a 140-pound guy. And so you think on face value, like, well, that seems kind of unfair. You know what I mean?
Technique goes a long way.
It really does. There's a guy named Mikey Musameshi that just won, I believe it was the Pans. I could be wrong. But the Pans are a very, very high-level tournament in jiu-jitsu, and he won the absolute division, and Mikey's a featherweight.
That's awesome.
So it's very, very impressive. And he fought guys that are giants. And I take that back. I don't know if he won, but I think he took second or something like that against, I think he lost to a heavyweight black belt world champ. So, I mean, very, very impressive. It's probably the only sport that something like that could occur. Technique is such an integral part of the sport that your technique can take you that far that you can take on somebody that much bigger than you and still succeed if your technique's spot on. And that's been my whole jiu-jitsu journey. I mean, I've been 160 pounds, you know, my entire jiu-jitsu journey, give or take, and almost always been the smaller guy in the gym, you know, in the group of training partners, and, you know, put the work in, and it drove me to be better. And even now, I mean, the majority of my guys are plus 200 plus, and it's nothing. I mean, I don't say it's nothing there. It's a long day rolling with some of these guys, especially. But
that technique goes a long way.
Does.
I mean,
it really
obviously,
does.
if striking was involved, it changes the game a
Absolutely,
lot. But like,
yeah.
I've been in situations where just playing around. You know, I've wrestled on a buddy or something like that, and
Strength
I don't know how to wrestle.
Yeah,
whatever. And I was probably like 235, 240 at the time, and this dude's like 145 soaking wet. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then it started getting escalated, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm just gonna, you know. And he was a wrestler in high school or something.
Okay.
So he knew a lot more than what he was doing than I did. The next thing I know, he's like picking me up and like, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? Like, it's like all I could do was just hold him. Like once I got him, I just had to hold him on, hold him for dear life because I had no idea what I was doing. It's like, okay, I get it.
It's so true. We see it. We see it every day. Every day we train. If we have somebody new come in, and you'll see that, that alarming look on their face, like this is, it's everything you thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? Like, and it's funny because it's like we have new people come in a lot, and it's either two avenues. It's like, either they respect the sport completely and they understand it, or, you got to kind of baptize them a little bit and make them believe.
They don't understand it and they don't respect it. And they soon will once they get to understand it.
And, even when I was starting getting my gym off the ground, it was, there was a lot of those type of interactions where I've had, just people walking off the street, just kind of like, what are you doing in here? You know what I mean? Like, you guys just fight? You know what I mean? And it was important for me, in hindsight, to go through that and to find out, like, does this stuff work? Does it work on everybody? You know what I mean? Because you train with people long enough, they start to respect you, and you know what I mean? They're like, you're good. Okay, that's enough. And vice versa. But to really take it, back in the it was like the early 90s, they had what's called the Gracie Challenge, and it was like this long-standing challenge of like a lot of money, like $100,000, that like if you come in and beat us, if anybody could come in and beat us, we'll give you the money. And there were stories, and they're probably like this side of mythology, but but if you learn a little jiu-jitsu and you kind of get a peek in, it's like, well, this is probably real. These are real things. But the same thing, we call them dojo storms, but when people just bust in, like, I want to fight you. You know what I mean? Like, you run the place. But yeah, I mean, fortunately, I put the time in, and you carry that jiu-jitsu no matter what, as long as you keep your blade sharp. I mean, I was like, compared to that, you know what I mean? You gotta stay on top of it, and that's another really important part of jiu-jitsu that I think is different than any other endeavor I've ever had in my life. I'm pretty eclectic. I like a lot of different things, and I've tried a lot of different, hobbies, I guess you would, or pastimes in my life. But jiu-jitsu, I say it's the most demanding, but it's you have to stay on top of it, and it's getting a black belt, which is a very, it's a big achievement, and it's relatively rare to find a legit black belt. But even then, I can't just, okay, I'm a black belt, now what?
Right.
Which is, it's almost love-hate, you know what I mean? I would love to just like, okay, done with that part of it, I have to go to something else. But as soon as you say that black belt's worthless.
Right.
If you don't keep your blade sharp,
they call it the coral belt. You going for that?
The coral belt, yeah. So that's a good question, because it's like, because
there's differences in all the different practices and whatnot.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu and
and just to really simplify it, once you get your black belt, everything after the black belt, it's all time based, as long as you're involved in the sport. So
gotcha.
Degrees on your belt are just based on time. So once you become a black belt, every 3 years you get a degree. And in true jiu-jitsu fashion, your first stripe on your black belt is called a first degree. Not like, you don't start with a first degree, you're just a black belt.
Gotcha.
And then once you get a stripe, you're a first degree black belt. So I got my first degree last year.
Because I've been just a black belt. We have a first degree black belt.
But that's what I'm saying. It's kind of silly because it's just time based. You don't do anything to get that.
I wasn't sure if there was like any like required time or like anything like that you had to try.
It takes a long time. Yeah, it takes a long time to. I forget what a coral belt is. I think it's 8 degrees.
Is that the highest? And I was going to ask.
Red belt's technically the highest.
Well, isn't it the? I thought I saw a clip where it said something about in order to get a red belt, if you got it at like 8, if you got your black belt at 18, you'd be like 67 or something like that.
Oh yeah, it's insane, and it's like, I mean, guys now like even and I love it. There's a guy named Rickson Gracie, and he's Royce's brother, so the UFC guy's brother Rickson. Kind of just the unsung hero of the family. He's just a monster of a man. super. I mean, he's the guy. He's our Superman. But Rickson like just now got his red belt, and I love it because he doesn't wear it. They gave him. They did the ceremony, and I mean, you see pictures of him, and sometimes he's wearing that. Sometimes he's wearing a coral belt. Sometimes he's wearing a black belt. He doesn't care. And Royce Gracie was always great about that because, and not to get in the history of jiu-jitsu, but you know, when it first started, there was only like two, like in some martial arts, there's only two belts. There's a white belt and black belt, you know, and everything in between, you're just a student. And Helio Gracie was famous for wearing a blue belt. And now blue belt is part of the chain, right? So it goes white, blue, purple, brown, black. But Helio went back to kind of the roots of the whole thing and just put on a blue belt. And in Helio is like, he was like the red belt. He was like kind of the, you know, the patron saint of jiu-jitsu, if you will. He's Royce's dad.
Gotcha.
Kind of helped grow the sport in Brazil.
No, correct. Just from my mind.
Yeah.
Was he the last 10th degree that was alive? Because I think I saw something too where there is no more 10th degree because that was saved for like the founders of it or something like that.
You're exactly right. I mean, to be honest, anybody that's serious about the sport, it's kind of neither here nor there. Like if you're a red belt, it's just like, oh, you know, cool, you know.
It's just the history piece of it. My brain.
Yeah,
I wanted to sort that out in my brain.
You know, my personal opinion, I would never put a red belt on, no matter how long I'm in the sport. I don't need a red belt.
Would you hang it on your wall though?
I would not.
No, not even like a...
No, because
hey,
I mean, my
cool.
contributions to the sport were, you know, I guess at the end of the day, it's you know, when I promote my first black belt, I want them, and it's going to be a requirement. I don't have any black belts yet. I have everything up to a brown belt. I have white belts, obviously, blue belts. I got a couple purple belts, and I have one brown belt. But when that black belt does get promoted, and he's a great guy, and you know, everybody that trains with us already knows this guy. But I want them to be able to take jiu-jitsu and share it with the world. So they have to be able to teach. Right. And if I can do that, and if he can take students and teach them, I mean, it's ironic because the guy that's my brown belt is actually quite a bit older than me. But to me, it's just about spreading the sport. I mean, I could, you know, I was talking about it today, but if you're like into video games at all, like in Call of Duty, you can prestige, right? So you get to the highest level, then you start over. And I love it. Go ahead, man. I love it because I would love to. I mean, I do that sometimes just for fun. I'll just, you know, tie a white belt on or whatever, because it's at the end of the day, that's what makes the sport good. It's the fact that the belts really don't matter.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So when I said hanging on the wall, I don't meant like, I don't.
No, I know what you mean as an achievement. Yeah.
Or like, would you, I guess maybe that's kind of the distinction there is, you know, would you have it at home, like in a chest somewhere? That way, like
absolutely.
when you're you know, that way. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I was like, man, like this guy's really, he's
but,
really feeling the soul of this thing.
But at the same time,
made me feel bad.
It would never be something I would wear. I would never wear a coral belt. I'm a black belt, and I take a lot of. I mean, obviously, jiu-jitsu's strange, right? Because it's like the belt system is literally like when you're doing it, all you're focused on is that next belt. Like, man, I want to get a blue belt. Man, I want to get a purple belt. Man.
Well, it's like that little kid, like,
yeah,
I just want to be tall enough to ride that ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Like,
and then
I just want to get older. I want to get older. I want to be a grown up. And then you get grown up, and you're like,
Yeah, exactly. You're so right. And it was the same thing, you know, when I first started to when I got a black belt. I remember, man, you know, I wonder if I could, you know, and in my head, I always told myself, yeah, you stick it out, you know, you put the work in, it's bound to happen. But like, it's always in your head, like, man, can I get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And then, you know, my whole journey over the last like decade and a half or however long it's been has been kind of geared towards that. And I mean, I take a lot of pride in my belts and my black belt. But after I got it didn't matter. It was like, oh, this isn't about the belts. It's never been about the belts.
Right.
Because it's funny because, you know, belts in jiu-jitsu are just kind of like if you roll in with somebody that's a purple belt, there's an expectation in your head, like, this guy's probably pretty good. You know what I mean? But I get surprised all the time. I get white belts that give me a hard time. And I got, I've rolled with black belts that I've smoked. So it's like, you know what I mean? But that
could be too. I mean, just
a microcosm, you know what I mean? And like in our universe, to like the average person, a black belt, and I don't want to. I hate talking like this because it sounds kind of pompous, but a black belt to the average person, that's like a Jedi. You know what I mean? It takes a long time.
I don't think that's pompous at all. If you understand anything about jiu-jitsu,
yeah.
I mean,
but if somebody is an actual legitimate black belt, and that's my thing. It's always like when somebody says that somebody's a black belt or tells me about a black belt, or I ask who the instructor was at this academy or blah, blah, blah. It's always, and it goes back to the lineage, like who are they a black belt under? You know what I mean? Not that that's a huge deal, but at least it gives me some validity that they're not just like, I don't know, or if the black belt can't tell me who gave them their black belt, right. We have a problem.
Buy it at a Goodwill.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody can buy a black belt, right? I always tell people that when they're talking about going to buy their first gi or whatever, and they're like, should I buy a white belt? I was like, buy whatever belt you want, but you got to wear it in here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But
it's always better to be underestimated.
Yes.
I think that's a safe thing.
But I don't know where I was going with that, but it's black belts. It's definitely it's a benchmark. But like I said, I judge, not judge, but I to validate a black belt in my mind was, who gave you the black belt? Okay, that's legit. So do you have any competition or wins? And do your students have any competition experience or wins? And with COVID, it's kind of messed up all our competition, but we as a team, and I always
let me ask you a question about that real quick. So you said about the competitions and whatnot, and I'm assuming this is just you're talking to, for lack of a better word, someone bragging about a black belt.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would imagine that just from everything I've gathered from the sport and what you've said, that like you could walk in there and you could train for 10 years, never have a competition. It's just like, hey, this is just what I like.
And there's guys like that,
right? And so like I think just for the understanding of, you're talking about someone just like bragging about what they're doing. All right, well, if you're bragging about it, then
what do you got to show me?
Right. That makes sense. I just wanted to clear
absolutely. And I don't mean that in a like you're not a black belt if you don't compete or anything like that, because there are room, and me myself, like I wasn't a super active competitor. I think interesting story. So my last competition I did was a Fight to Win Pro. It was like relatively soon after I got my black belt. And I didn't compete for like 7 years before that. So the last time I competed, I was like a purple belt, and I didn't compete again until I was a black belt. So there was a lot on the line for me. And it was a big experience for me. Both like, it was probably one of the biggest moments of my life competing as a black belt, at Fight to Win. Cause I had a lot of people, a lot of my friends, a lot of my family, all my students were there. And it was broadcast, so it's live. But I wanted
the pressure on.
I wanted at least, I thought at the least, if I'm going to be a black belt, and it's different for everybody, I think. But for me personally, I was like, you have to compete against another black belt who's a competitive black belt with no asterisks, I didn't go to a tournament and win the tournament because nobody showed up, or the guy got injured and pulled out. You know what I mean? Yeah. I wanted a legit win, right. And against a legit competitor.
Right.
And I achieved that. I hope to do it again. Everything's been kind of weird lately with everything going on. Competitions have not been going like they used to. But I always push my guys to compete, and I don't think it's not for everybody. Right. But what it does is it creates such a strong team environment, because what you run into in a lot of gyms that don't compete a lot is, let's say
with themselves.
Yes, they're competing with each other. Right. So they're holding back moves. They're not helping each other out. They're like, I'm going to go in next class. I'm going to choke Fred out. You know what I mean? Whatever it may be. But it's not good for the team when you do that.
That's a good perspective. When you all I never would have thought about that.
Everybody signs out.
Everyone's fighting. Everyone's, in the gym, everyone is competing against each other. So you kind of learn each other's chess moves.
Yeah.
So then that's part of it. When you go into a competition, it would, all right, what kind of moves is this guy going to bring?
Yes.
But it makes sense though. So then they're say in the gym, all right, well, I'm gonna hold this move back from this guy, so I can beat him next week.
Hey, show me that armbar you did. Like, I'm not showing you nothing. You know what I mean? Because it's working.
It's my armbar.
Yeah. It's so true.
Own armbar.
It's so true, and it's good. It's good to take the team to competitions, and everybody competes, and it's a good measuring stick to see where your jiu-jitsu. We've done well at tournaments. I'm very, very proud of all my guys that go and compete for me. And girls, I think competition is paramount to progress in jiu-jitsu, at least in my gym. Some gyms don't, like some of the gyms I've trained with in the past, like the competition aspect of it wasn't really pushed as much. And I think that's a product of Ohio in general. Didn't really have a strong competition scene. We had like one tournament, mainly based out of Columbus. Very rarely came up here. The IBJJF is the big organization, probably the biggest next to like ADCC. But the IBJJF, just recently, probably in the last couple of years, they just now they've been around since the 90s, and they just added a location in Ohio. The closest we had was New York or Chicago. And I think it stifled the competitive nature of gyms for a while, because there was only, one competition to compete at. I mean, you either did NAGA or you did the AGC, which used to be the OGC, the Ohio Grappling Challenge, which is now the American Grappling Challenge. And they put on a great tournament. But now you have a lot of options. You have the Fuji tournaments. You have Grappling Industries. There's a lot of different options for competition, and it's a great time to be a jiu-jitsu competitor, because you do have a lot of, all things considered, maybe not right now, right. But it's a good time, in the history of jiu-jitsu to be competing, because there are a lot of options.
Well, I think it's a really interesting perspective. Especially with progression and everything. I think you could tie that. I think there's a lot of things, the more and more I learn about jiu-jitsu, is you could tie to life. But it's super interesting, because I never really thought about that. Is, you hear a lot about, well, we don't want to compete because a lot of people compete just to, prove their worth and show that, I'm a badass, or I'm a winner, I compete. And, they have that competitive drive, which is all good and fine. If you have that competitive drive, you want to compete. But I never really thought about it from the aspect of, in the gym sense, where people are holding back because they're not trying to help each other.
Yeah.
Because they're not competing. They're not building that team to go out and compete. It's just, well, I'm my own team. And I've been a real loner for the vast majority of my life.
Yeah.
I never really had that thought click. Well, if you build a team and then you compete with that team, then you can all grow. Even you're growing individually, but you can grow as a team together in order to go out there and learn new things, and then come back and develop that.
It takes that camaraderie to the next level. And to be honest with you, before, I took guys to competitions. I started my gym when I was a brown belt, and then kind of grew from there. And I had guys competing under me when I was a brown belt, but the gym competing so much, and I knew how important competition was in jiu-jitsu. And to be honest, showing those guys competition and pushing competition and wanting them to all compete pushed me to compete myself. So when I signed up for Fight to Win, when Seth called and I had my match made and Fight to Win. Really interesting tournament too, because It's not like a typical wrestling tournament where like there's rounds, so you get best first round, second round, you know, it's point based. Fight to Win is one match, one guy, submission only. And if it doesn't go to the submission, there's judging criteria and they judge you. Whoever's attacking more, whoever's going after it, you know. But when I signed up for it, you know, I knew I had there was a precedence. I had to set an example for everyone I trained and everybody that there was a lot of weight on my shoulders that I put there. But I sought out the best guys I knew. I mean, I went out and trained with, you know, the best group of guys. I went and trained with black belts, other black belts, Chris Kriebel, Josh Roller, Adam Nail, you know, all my guys that I train with all the time, you know, Connor, Ben, Brandon, Tim. I could just name drop all day. Everybody's really important to me. But that we went to a room in Green and trained there, and those guys really took me to the next level, like in a competitive sense, because for the longest time I never really thought of myself like it sounds weird, but I never thought of myself like an athlete. I was a jiu-jitsu guy. And I'll never forget talking to Chris, and they're all really high-level wrestlers. I mean, Chris and Josh, and I remember telling them, you know, in a roundabout way, like, well, I'm not an athlete like you guys. And I remember him like stopping, like, what are you talking about? You're an athlete. Like, you're here with us. You're tough as it gets, you know?
Haven't competed yet.
Yeah. Well, and not at their level that they're competing, you know? So.
Well, have you ever thought about, and I don't know if you do this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I've been involved in powerlifting a little bit.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's kind of, it's small groups and little pockets.
Very similar. Yeah.
Pockets here and there, as far as just the structure goes.
Yeah.
You know, and I know a lot of gyms, sometimes they'll just set up competitions between gyms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they'll go and do that. Is there anything kind of like that?
There absolutely is. Yeah. There's a lot of good schools that do that. There's a, Chad that runs East Coast, down in the Canton area. I mean, he's great. He puts on those. He's got I believe it's a blue belt and white belt tournament that he puts on. And it's great. I mean, you have gyms from all over. I mean, the community in general is it's such a good community. I mean, there are great gyms now. There didn't used to be. It really used to be, you know, there was a gym in Akron, there was a gym in Columbus, and I think there was one in Toledo. I mean, Cleveland too, obviously. And there was like one each.
Right.
You know,
there's a lot I would think there's a lot, especially with MMA coming, you know, the last, probably 15 years. It's just gone through the
completely changed the landscape of the sport, which is great.
I would expect it to grow even more. In my eyes, I would expect it to continue that growth, because you look at...
I hope so.
You know I've thought about it a lot. I don't... I have a 9-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of different reasons to think about that. But, you know, especially with boys and their contact sports, it was CTE, football, and, you know, there's a lot more people are thinking like, man, do I really want my kid involved in that? Like, it teaches them a lot of sports, teach kids a lot of good things, but do I really want them, you know, getting concussions and stuff and on a, you know, weekly basis? So, and I think jiu-jitsu is one of those things where I've heard it said by people that you can go for hours and roll and do these things, and you're exhausted or tired. You might pull a muscle, but
you can train tomorrow.
And you're hoping you're probably not going to walk away with a broken nose and a concussion. You know what I mean? You can do it, and then you can do it again. You can do it again. You can do it the next day, and it's, you know, it's not something you end up, you know, 20, 30 years down the road and you can't remember your name.
No, you're absolutely right. It's the closest you can get to, you know, kind of pegging that rev limit, you know, hitting the rev limiter.
Right.
It's the closest you can get to that and still being able to do it the next day. Now, I will say, like, there's limits to it. Obviously,
there's dangers and everything.
Yes,
and if you get knocked, if you're getting choked out, that's all.
If you're not smart about it, you know, you're gonna pay for it for sure. And you know, it's just part of growing with the sport. And there's definitely people that, you know, take it too far sometimes and get hurt and stuff like that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you can train, if you train smart, you can do it very consistently. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting nowadays, especially bringing this, when I brought the gym to Worcester and I brought jiu-jitsu to Worcester in general, it was great just seeing the involvement and the people I got in the doors and the people that I continue to get in the doors. It's and I see it change their life. I mean, and I don't say that in like in an abstract way. I mean, it really does change people's lives. It does.
I've heard that a lot. It's
the best therapy I've ever had. I mean, limited experience, but nevertheless, I mean, it's.
But I think, like you said, you're able to just shut your brain off to everything from outside.
And there's a singular focus, and it's something to always work towards, And there's definitely bad days on the mat. I mean, that's for sure. And more often than not, you're going to have a bad day in the mat.
But it's the good days.
Oh, the good days. Oh, man.
I usually, I dabble in golfing.
Yeah.
I'm not a terrible golfer.
Yeah.
But I joke, with some of my buddies I go golfing with, it's when you hit that really good shot, it's like, oh, well, I guess I got to keep playing now.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. I mean, it really is.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about. So,
yeah,
the gi and no gi.
Yeah.
I always said no. The gi is the bathrobe. It's for people that don't
pajamas.
know.
Yeah.
So I obviously, to me, the very first thing I think about the differences, because I know there's. Do they do competitions in gi and no gi?
Yeah.
Okay, so then. For me, the first thing off the top of my head is I can understand there's probably a difference there because you have your body's covered in this cloth, which obviously when you're doing grappling and jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of things to hold on to.
Right.
So besides that, though, just being able to, because I think there's even a lot of different ways where they use the gi to do certain maneuvers and stuff. Yeah. So, but besides that, like, I guess, what's the difference and why is it just because of the traditional aspect and they just...
That's a good question. Like, what's the purpose of why do you guys still wear that goofy uniform? And I get that a lot, to be honest with you. Because
I use my sleeve to choke you out.
Yeah. No, I talk to people all the time that are new to the sport and they're like, do you guys wear that uniform or something like that? And it's the uniform and the gi in general, is a big part of the sport, and it's actually part of what we do. So we use the grips a lot. I mean, it's kind of part of it. As far as like functionality, listen, I'm not going to be there's a lot of people that preach the merits of training with a gi or the merits of training without the gi, in MMA, they don't wear gi, so wouldn't you want the most realistic? I would tell those people that make those deviations, that have an argument on either side, throw that out and do what you want to do. I like the gi because it's like checkers to chess to me, and not to dismiss no gi at all, because we do no gi at my gym. But you definitely have more attacking options, and I've always liked it. It's a little more technical. There's a technical side of it that I've always gravitated towards, and I've always been a very technical jiu-jitsu fighter, and the gi definitely lends to more technicality, and no gi kind of lends to more athleticism, and but we do both. I don't want to be like team gi or team no gi, or like, why do you do one or the other?
So I guess it's the gi is a little more of that traditional and sport oriented piece of it, and it seems like you are more of the sport of the of the jiu-jitsu, and just kind of making a general statement here, but then the no gi would be more of the combat form, defensive, real life kind of. So if you were doing it for that kind of.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would push back, and that's a good question. A lot of people think that. I would push back a little bit. Obviously,
I'm making myself a dumbass. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen.
You got a flannel shirt on. I see some lapels.
Well, yeah, but I'm just
not at all. Yeah. Because you're right in a lot of aspects. If
I'm just asking questions. No, I'm not making statements. I'm just asking questions. I may form them in a statement.
It's a good question, and it's a fascinating way to think about it, because listen, if I had guys that were strictly doing MMA, we wouldn't train in the gi as much as we train no gi, for sure. Because it's a very controlled environment, right? If you're going to do MMA, are they going to be wearing a gi? No. I want to emulate as close to...
Which Gracie did.
Yeah.
He was badass.
Yes, he was. But I want to emulate as close to the environment they're going to be interacting with as possible.
Makes sense.
And the argument I would give, as far as talking about like, the realistic self-defense side of it, and I always say this, and it's kind of like a cop-out to some extent, but like, I run into people with clothes on a lot more than I run into people with no clothes on. You know what I mean?
I feel bad for you.
And yeah, no, but you can point to anybody.
It makes sense.
Tim Kennedy is a great example of that. You look on Tim's social media. If anybody's familiar with Tim Kennedy, UFC fighter, special forces. He's a ranger. He's all that stuff. About as realistic as a combat athlete and individual as you could possibly get. Tim trains with the gi on a lot. Tim trains in Austin at a Gracie Humata. He's a black belt, and he's always got that thing on, and he's always training in the gi. And I think Tim's a very practical guy. And if you ever want an example of somebody that's like practical and like, what is Tim doing to be practical about his keeping himself sharp? Right. He trains in the gi all the time. Jocko trains in the gi all the time. He's a black belt. He's a very legitimate black belt with very big credentials. You know what I mean? I guess to circle back though, I don't do it for that. I do it because I like it. You know what I mean? And I teach it because it's what I'm best at. We definitely do no gi. I like no gi. I like the gi a little bit more. The gi forces you to be a little more technical. You can't slip out of things. You can't just, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't get me there, because you were sweaty, or you know what I mean?
Right. No, that totally makes sense. I mean, I get you just changed my thinking because you're right. You do encounter more people with clothes on. And even if it is minimal clothes, it's still clothes. It's not.
Friction makes a huge difference especially in a situation where you're grappling. And I could point to specific examples like, most people that are familiar with any little bit of the sport, an arm bar, or, any of those positions like that. An arm bar functions very differently as far as like getting out of it when you're covered in sweat and there's no clothes on you.
It's a lot of holes.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's about what you think. You slip out if you don't have everything locked on. And that's why you don't see any arm bars usually late rounds in the UFC because they can slip right out of it.
I feel like years ago you used to see it a lot more, but maybe it's going back to that whole why the leg locks are now in Jiu Jitsu because it was a thing, and then people understood how to get out of it.
Yeah, but with the gi on, it forces you can't just slip out of things. You have to technically take it apart. The friction makes a big difference. Of how you interact with these things. You can't just muscle your way out of these positions. And you can ask anybody bigger that comes and trains with us, like, you can't, for the most part, you can't muscle yourself out of these positions. Like, we're going to get you. You're going to get got. You know what I mean? And there's a famous guy, he's in the UFC now. His name's Ryan Hall, but his quote is, people don't think jiu-jitsu be like it do, but it do, or something like that. I've got a butcher in it, but it's true, and it's always like I rest easy at night knowing that, because it's like everybody that walks through the doors that's new or that's been guys have been training a while know, but like you don't really think it's going to be like that. Like you see on TV, like you couldn't get me like that, and I mean most people, it's not buried as much as it used to be. It's not kind of in the shadows as much, so people kind of understand. But to really get an understanding once you get on the mat, it's like it's really mind blowing to a lot of people, like how much control you can have over another human being with just the techniques you have. I mean, it's the purest martial art in my opinion.
And that's what I love about it. Like when you said you have to technically take it apart, and that's when you, and obviously, like I said, I know basically near to nothing about jiu-jitsu.
No, you know enough. You're asking a good question.
But it's when I realized that like this isn't just. I'm gonna tie it to a video I saw the other day. It was when Kimbo Slice got found.
Yeah.
That's just the dude that just smashes people's faces in. And and they would punch him in the face, and he would put his hands down and ask for another.
Yeah.
And then he would crush their face in.
Yes. Yes.
That's a whole different thing than realizing that a sport like jiu-jitsu or whatever you want to call it, anybody can do it.
Right.
And you just have to learn how the pieces of the puzzle fit together, and the chess game against your opponent, and
how to
technically take it apart is just fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Assassin nerds, is that what I think Andy Stump and Joe Rogan call them?
Yeah, and that's a great way to think about it. And I always tell people, it's probably the only place, and like I said, for the longest time, like when I was training with my crew in green with Chris and Josh and Adam, when I was with those guys, I mean, even the guys that are on the mat with me, I mean, I have all-American wrestlers, and they're sharing the mat with people that have never played a sport with their life, or never played a sport in their life. And they're okay. They're holding their own. And to me, any sport where you can bring two people together like that says a lot about the technical side of the sport. And there's not much, you know what I mean? Like you look at like some of the most famous athletes, ever, you look at the Bo Jacksons or somebody like that, or the LeBron James or whatever it may be, that like would probably, but you know what I mean? Real serious athletes that like would probably excel at any sport you put them in, or be at least high level and whatever. And if any of those guys came to jiu-jitsu, they'd probably do well, but they'd probably get choked out by a kid that, is a video game nerd or whatever it may be.
There's a technicality there.
Yes.
And genetics doesn't always overcome.
Exactly. And it probably more so than any other sport. But obviously, and I always tell people, strength is never a weakness. You're never gonna, it's never gonna be a bad thing to be stronger or to be more athletic. Enough. Yes. But at the end of the day, it's about the technical side of it. And that's why I always pride myself, and I always tell people when they come in to train with me, and Joe Rogan has said this many times on his podcast, but, training with an instructor that's a smaller guy is always a blessing, because throughout my jiu-jitsu career, like I said, I've historically been the smaller guy in the room. So I can't overcome my lack of technique with strength. I can't overcome my lack of technique with athleticism.
That, hey, I could eventually.
If it's going to work, it's got to work, or it's not going to work at all. You know what I mean? Over the years, I've developed my technique to be, relatively, you get rid of the stuff that doesn't work, bring in the stuff that does work, and make sure the stuff that does work is sharp. And every little, instead of grabbing here, I'm going an inch up. You know what I mean? Instead of having a grip like this, I'm going to have a grip like this. Palm down versus palm up, 2 fingers in versus 3. It all makes a difference, and it all adds up. And I teach the same way. And I had somebody just say Friday on our fundamentals class, she said, you teach in a very scholastic way. And that's what I told her. It's because my whole jiu-jitsu journey, I've had to be right, and there's no room to be wrong. Because when you're 160 pounds rolling with somebody that's 240, there's no room for error.
You have to have that technicality.
It's got to be right, and it can't be wrong. And even to this day, with all the big guys that I train with, it's got to be right, or it's not going to work. And the stuff I teach
because if you can beat your instructor's ass all the time, it's like, what am I here for?
It's not good for business. Yeah, not good.
Well, that's like we've talked about before too. There was a quote, and I don't remember if this was on Rogan's podcast or if it was a different one that I saw. It was Representative Dan Crenshaw. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yep.
He was a Navy SEAL, and he talked about they were talking about gun control. Whatever. Definitely not going to get into that.
No.
But he had mentioned that like, someone with an AR-15 doesn't scare him as long if they're close by. He's like, because all you have to do is get a hold of the barrel. Because that person with the gun, they think they're in control,
right?
But no, it's whoever has the barrel that's in control. And if I can control the end of that barrel, that technicality aspect of, all right, this thing doesn't scare me anymore because I can technically control it.
Yeah.
And it was just like a little light bulb that some people, like, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, like when you are able to have control of a situation like that, and you can take this scary thing, and now it's like, you're nothing now,
right?
Because I know how to control you. Like,
and I mean, that's a great calling card for me, because it's like, I always tell people that, when it comes to fire, I mean, nowadays you talk self-defense and stuff like that. And I know I'm a realist. It's, if you have a concealed carry, like that's, you know what I mean? It's hard to beat a bullet. You know what I mean? I'm not, despite what the internet memes say, I can't fly, I cannot dodge bullets.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm very real when it comes to that kind of stuff. But like you hear all those guys say, whether it be Tim Kennedy, whether it be Jocko, whether it be any of those guys that are high level operators, and the SEALs are obviously they're some of the highest levels of that, and there's levels above that, but any of those guys, you hear them talk, like Andy Stump, it's all about training. It's all about being technical. It's all about, and all those guys. And I think it's no coincidence that they're all proponents of jiu-jitsu. And I can't forget my jiu-jitsu at home. It's never not with me.
It never jams.
Never jams.
Yeah.
You can get in a jam, you know what I mean?
Right.
But anybody can. There's a margin for error for everything.
Well, that goes back to what you said earlier about if you know defense, then you can use defense instead of having to use offense.
Yes.
And I think there's a good connection there with, somebody that may be a CCW, but what's better for society as a whole? Somebody that is a CCW holder, or someone that's a CCW holder and knows jiu-jitsu? Because I would imagine that person's going to de-escalate the situation. It's always 99 times out of 100 better than that. It's just the person with the gun.
It's so true. I mean, you look at any aspect, and I'm kind of talking above my pay grade a little bit, but it's always about that. It's always about de-escalating the situation and regaining control. I mean, you look at anything that happens that any type of situation where it stems from aggression or loss of control in any context, and it's kind of talking a little abstract, but you want to get the situation back under control no matter what. You know what I mean? Right. And it's always been like that. That's why there's hostage negotiators, not just like, calling the air support. You know what I mean? Just like take the building out. You know what I mean? There's and it's jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, is always it's kind of at the core of that. You know what I mean? When you can, and everybody that trains jiu-jitsu, it's like you don't, for the most part, and I can't speak for everybody that's ever trained, but
it's a lot of people.
Most of the people it is, but most of the people I've ever trained with or that I have trained, they're not like, yeah, I got in this fight last weekend or something like that. It's never that. It's not. It's like, this is silly. What is going on? Because you have, and you could dive into the psychological side of that, where like I have nothing to prove to anybody.
Right.
I prove it every single day. I walk on those mats, and I put myself in the situation where I'm as vulnerable as a human being can be. I'm putting my life in somebody else's hands, and they're putting the same thing in my hands. And not to sound barbaric or anything like that, but like at the end of the day, like in certain situations, especially with the choke on, like if they didn't tap, that'd be it. Like you'd be a murderer.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's easy to gloss over that. And sometimes it scares people away, but it's the truth of the matter. But once you do that, everything, there was a great quote. Yeah. There's a great quote, and I forget what book I was reading, but like, it's like once you've experienced, it was like once you fought everything, it feels like you're walking through life with the volume turned down. And there's always, when you train, and anybody that's trained would probably agree, when you're done training and you're on your way home, there's an afterglow, I call it, after you train, that nothing in the world could even touch you at that point. You know what I mean? Like, anything could be happening around you, and you're like, I don't know. I almost got killed back there. You know what I mean? Like, repeatedly for, you know what I mean, for 2 hours, and whatever's going on is going on. But it's something that it changes how you carry yourself. It changes, and especially nowadays with, like I said, the cultural turmoil and stuff like that. There's a lot of angst in society, and I think that's why, Jordan Peterson has become so popular, because people need direction. People want something.
He's a Peterson fan too, huh?
Because we've been, and not to get too philosophical, because I'm not, like I said, I'm talking above my pay grade a little bit.
Oh, that's what Tony and I do every single time. Talk way above our pay grade. That's
but
what we do. It's welcome here.
It really makes you understand who you are and who you're not, which is really important.
Yeah.
Because your shortcomings are just as important as what you're good at. And I think more people need to put themselves in a position where you can get your ego checked repeatedly, not just once, not like, man,
because that son of a bitch keeps on growing.
It does. And it morphs, and, and like everything, like Jordan Peterson says, and I think he's, I don't know if you guys have talked about it, if you're a Peterson fan, but he's been definitely, in my opinion, misconstrued in what he's saying and what his thoughts and views and stuff are. But your ego is, in all regard, it's a living thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you feed it, it grows. You know what I mean? If you starve it, it shrinks. If you keep it in check, if you battle it every now and then, you're in control of it. Right. And it's not about defeating your ego. For me, it's about controlling it, because you need it sometimes. You definitely need it. It's not something you want to wash out of your psyche. But it's about being in control of that ego and knowing when to use it and when to keep it in check. And I think
understanding how strong it can be.
Yes, more often than not, people are just feeding that thing, and they're feeding it bullshit, and it grows beyond their capabilities. Yeah. And then, before too long, you're on World Star and you're getting knocked out in a BW3s. You know what I mean?
I don't think I think because people are I don't necessarily think they do it maliciously. They just don't know what else to feed. So they have to feed something. So, yes. Well, I'm told I'm supposed to love myself, and I'm great, and I'm wonderful, and I deserve awards. So I'm just going to keep feeding that, and they don't understand what else to feed. But I totally agree there. And I want to go back to one thing you said, because I have one more question.
I'm just talking.
No, yeah. Yeah. So sometimes we have to take a break and come back. But there was one more thing you touched on, and you kind of talked about the hostage negotiators and you don't just send in the airstrike. And I think it was Jocko who said two things.
Big fan. I'm a huge fan of Jocko.
Phenomenal. Yeah. He's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But one thing he said before I continue that thought, same thing you were saying before, was he knows his capabilities, and maybe somebody said this about Jocko. I can't remember for sure, but he's 220, ex-Navy, or 230, something like that. He's somewhere around next Navy's
240.
Yeah. Is he that big? Is he 240?
He's a big dude.
He's a big fella.
Either way.
Yeah.
Either way.
He's a gorilla.
He's a big dude.
Vanilla
Ex-Navy SEAL. He is a jiu-jitsu black belt. I don't know what stage but either
he's
way.
Legit. I will say as a black belt, Jocko is legit. I mean, he's Dean Lister's training partner, and Dean Lister is he's the forefather of a lot of the modern day tendencies in jiu-jitsu, like the leg locks.
So he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
And obviously he's lived a life. They said that, someone like that who knows their capabilities and has demonstrated them time and time again. When they're in a bar with their wife, if some dude wants to pick a fight with them, they're more than likely to go, all right, honey, let's go.
Yes.
Like, let's just walk away. This guy doesn't know who he's talking. He doesn't know what he's getting himself into.
Absolutely.
So I don't need to prove myself to you.
No.
Like, I don't need to knock you out in front of all these hundreds of people and talk to the cop. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's walk away. So that brings me to the idea, and I think it was Jocko who had this idea. And we don't have to get into it. I don't want to get it deep in the weeds on this one, but just a real kind of general idea. What do you think about? He mentioned that he thinks if every police officer was trained to be a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, or at least a lot of them, how that could.
I think that was Andrew Yang, actually.
Was it Andrew Yang that came up with that idea?
Very weird.
Maybe it was Andrew
to
Yang.
hear that, but it was Andrew Yang.
Maybe it was. Maybe I heard Jocko.
Right.
Maybe I heard Jocko talking.
I'm sure
about
Jocko
it.
approves.
Yeah, maybe I heard Jocko talking about that. I get them all mixed up. I listen to so much, but so I saw Tony making a face at me but just generally, like, as
my thoughts on
instructor,
something like that. Yeah. I mean, like I said before, I'm biased. I think everybody should train jiu-jitsu. I mean, I hate to say that, but
when you realize it's kind of like when you realize everyone has a gun, you're a lot more peaceful.
Yeah, in a roundabout way.
Talking about Florida.
I mean, I see two sides of the coin for sure. Obviously, having a better trained police force is a good thing. Having a police force that's able to control problems without lethal force, I mean, it's really hard to argue against. I think the people that are against something like that, about all police officers, being a purple belt, probably have a skewed view of either police officers or a skewed view of jiu-jitsu. Because unfortunately today you're either in one side or the other. You either back them completely or you're against them completely.
I disagree with that.
Well,
it seems like that. I will say,
of course,
everyone wants to put you in a category.
I will say, perception.
Right. Everyone wants to put you in the category.
Yes. And I've clearly, if we're having this conversation, that's not the case. You know what I mean? If I can even separate the two, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And if we're even having this conversation, it obviously seems like a no-brainer. You know what I mean? Any tool you can give to help de-escalate. I'm going back to de-escalation. If you can de-escalate a situation in a peaceful way, right? If you can slow it down, nobody has to lose their life. You know what I mean? And then you can go on to see who's right or who's wrong. You know what I mean? I think that's good for just about every side of the coin.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's this side, that side, or the other side. It's really hard to argue with. I've heard arguments, it's an interesting topic, and I don't want to brush over anything. I mean, I have police officers that train with me that are good friends of mine. You know what I mean? Absolutely. But I see how people could misconstrue it and be like, you're teaching, and I'm playing devil's advocate. Please just bear with me. All right.
Yeah.
But I could see people being like, you're giving these power tripping cops more weapons to choke people with. I mean, George Floyd is a crazy example because it's literally, I mean, the whole topic of conversation was a choke. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like what we're getting back to now. You could also make the argument, which I would, if you're well trained and you know what a choke is and you know when a choke is occurring and when it's not occurring, regardless of whatever you feel about this or whatever side of the argument you land on, and just taking that situation completely out of this conversation, training and being able to de-escalate a situation, like I said, it's good for everybody. It saves lives. It saves money. Right. And Jocko said it many times, and
I was just about to touch on something.
In his last podcast with Rogan, he just talks about in any high level operator, whether it be a SEAL, whether it be a special forces guy. I mean, I have a good friend of mine that I went to high school with that was an Army Special Forces guy, very, very high level operating guy. But if I called him up right now and I asked him, how much training did you guys do? He would say the same thing. It's about 80 to 90% training, 10 to 20% real life situations. And I think that in a nutshell is what it's all about. The more training you get, the better equipped you are to deal with this stuff.
Right.
For whatever reason. And listen, I'm not, I don't want to turn this into a political discussion at all. From my humble opinion, you know what I mean? I think, like I said, anybody could benefit from jiu-jitsu. And more often than not, I've seen both sides. I definitely have seen both sides. I've seen bullies in jiu-jitsu. I've seen people that jiu-jitsu didn't fix. You know what I mean? That just, I don't want a blanket term.
Not going to fix everybody.
It's not, you know what I mean? And that's the unfortunate side of it, because we live in the real world, and people are going to be people, you know what I mean? And you have people, you know what I mean? And you see these stories all the time. You hear Rogan talk about it, and all these guys were like, bad people learn jiu-jitsu. There's bad people that are black belts and they use it nefariously.
Right.
But you know what I mean? You can't fix that with you can't fix that with jiu-jitsu. There's nothing I can do with jiu-jitsu.
There's some things that can't fix. One of my things I've always said, and I doubt it's original. Most of the things I say came from somewhere. I don't know where they came from.
Conduit.
Yeah.
Just be a conduit.
One thing I've always said is a person can change, but people are people, and you can't change people. It has to be that person has to find that thing.
Sure.
And I think to your point of the training aspect, it's if most people realize, like, if I was put in a lot of dangerous situations, whether it be, some of these military guys,
right,
or the police officers, or,
right,
first responders or firefighters, and all these, any type of job where is a high stress and it's
sure,
millisecond decisions.
Sure.
Or if I was put on a mat with someone that's jiu-jitsu, I don't know what the hell to do.
Right.
But the more training I have, the more I will be able to handle that situation properly.
Yes.
So I don't think more training is ever
no, not at all. It's not a bad thing. And I think, all the law enforcement people in my life that I've trained with, they're great people. I mean, everybody I know, at least in my personal life, they're great. And they're more than capable of handling themselves in a situation very carefully. I wish I could extend that to everybody. I wish everybody had the tools to deal with something, and there, like I said, there's these hot topics, these polarizing topics about chokeholds and things like that. In my, it's a little bit of an unpopular opinion. The chokehold is not the problem. The lack of understanding the chokehold is the problem.
It's the person behind the chokehold.
Yes.
Whether it be nefarious or not.
Yes. And you're exactly right. You're exactly right, Fred, because it's like, if the chokehold was the problem, I would have a very difficult time having a business.
Right.
Yeah. It's literally my business is teaching people chokeholds. Right. And to my knowledge, I don't think anybody's killed anybody. You know what I mean? Now, granted, I understand they're not putting themselves actively in that situation all the time. But for me, it's hard to argue, and it's neither here nor there, but it's hard to argue that training doesn't help these situations and help. I know, at least in my opinion, and anybody that's ever came and trained, I'm going to relate it back to jiu-jitsu, but when you start jiu-jitsu, when you're first time on the mat, when you're first going live, when you're rolling, it's a fight. You feel like, I feel like I'm on the floor and I'm getting beat up and like somebody's about to kill me. It's chaos. It's complete chaos. Now, on the other side of that, the person you're rolling with, your first class, to be honest, this is a rest round for him. He's just kind of phoning it in like, hey, buddy, and you're thinking this is the most intense thing you've ever been involved in.
He's just ringing on the cattle.
Exactly. He's taking this round off because he just rolled with a really tough guy. But I think it does a lot, Andrew Yang saying that about that, it's really important because, and not to discredit anybody, but anytime you can handle yourself better in a situation, with more calm, and anybody that's done anything, if you've been involved with firearms, if you've been involved with anything high stakes to any regard, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And we say that in jiu-jitsu. You say that when you train anything. You take that chaos and you shrink it down to what you can control.
Right.
And you do it in jiu-jitsu just as well. There's a great, I read a lot of guys that are SEALs and stuff like that. I love their books because I love the discipline and I love the high level operating, and I love all of that. I love the discipline to that stuff and how to handle yourself in high stress situations where I think it was Mark Owen in his book. I think it was No Hero. I could be wrong, but he talks about bringing everything into a small space, right? Control what you can control, right? And I think the example he was given when he's jumping out of a plane and the chute fails. Okay, that sucks. You know what I mean? What can I do? You know what I mean? And that's just like a little microcosm of how those guys probably live every part of their lives.
Right. Don't think about the ground. Think about how you can get there safely.
That didn't work. What else do I got? You know what I mean? You have to be, you can't be in a flurry, but you have to be precise. You have to make the right call, and you have to make a call quickly. And I think you could extend that to, everything that's going on right now. You have to make the right call. And, sometimes there's very uncomfortable situations. He's got everybody on whatever side you get on. And like I said, I don't want to turn this into anything it's not supposed to be.
You can be whatever you want.
But but you know what I mean? I think the world would be a better place if everybody did a little jiu-jitsu and everybody stepped out of their comfort zone and realized, to really get in control of that ego. And if everybody was in control of that ego, the world would be a much better place. Like you said earlier that, a well-armed society is a peaceful society. Regardless of what you think about that statement, you could always make the argument that, like, you know what I mean? When the stakes are high and you realize your capabilities and your lack of capabilities, you're going to operate a little different. And I think that's what jiu-jitsu does for people. It realizes, like, every guy, well, I can handle myself. If I got in a, you know what I mean? Like, I go to the gym all the time, no problem. And then you go to your first jiu-jitsu class and you're like, oh shit, like this is not,
I'm in trouble.
This is not, I don't know. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of people can't handle it.
I believe that steel doesn't fight back. Barbells,
yes.
and
and I listen, and I'm not discounting powerlifting. I'm not discounting any other sport, because you know what? Like, do what makes you happy, because life is short.
Oh yeah, they all have their own little niches, but just because you're a powerlifter, don't think you can beat everyone's ass all the time.
And even jiu-jitsu guys, I know jiu-jitsu guys are like, man, you're out of, like, what are you doing? Like, you're out of shape. Like, I know you're a black belt, but like, come on, man. And that was like, I tell you what, it was, and to kind of shift the topic, but that's always been my greatest fear. I was like, I always told myself, like, I'm never going to be that guy, that black belt, where my gut's hanging over my black belt. You know what I mean? I want to be engaged as long as possible. I'm going to be on the mat. I'm going to be given 100% every single time I step on that mat, because I owe it to the mat, and I owe it to, and I say jiu-jitsu in you know, kind of a pejorative, but I meet so many people. And even in the jiu-jitsu world where, you know, these guys they're in their 30s and they're like, yeah, well, I hurt my knee in high school and, you know, I can't really move around, or like, you know, oh, I'm old, or, oh, I'm kind of, you know, I'm not this or that. And I don't think
guys in their 30s are old, right?
And that's exactly what I'm getting at.
Okay.
And I want to tell them, and I don't tell them, you know, because like, it's hard to change people's mind when it comes to this stuff, but, you're 30, you have a lot of life left in front of you. And that is a long time to just say, yeah, pack it up. You know what I mean? Yeah. Probably more time than you put in front of yourself. I have a guy that trains with us that is in his mid 60s when I say trains with us, I'm talking trains with us. I'm talking every round he's engaged. Now, Jeff is an anomaly. Yeah, he's not like your typical, you know, like 60 in mid 60s. But it's an inspiration to everybody that wants to start this journey. You know, there's a famous quote, and it's been said many times, many ways, but the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago or today.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Change the past.
Yeah.
Change now.
And there's so many different ways to say it, but it's like, you can be whoever you want to be. And jiu-jitsu is a great example of that. Like, whatever misconceptions you have of yourself, like, they're whatever they are. And I think, you know, in talking about like social media and the internet today, it's one of the limitations of it, because you're stuck to a certain identity, right? When you're on Facebook and you're friends with everybody you went to high school with, and everybody knows you as this person, you know, maybe you were a knucklehead in high school, maybe you were like a slob in high school, maybe you were a slacker, maybe you were a jock, maybe whatever you were in high school. We all know that life after high school is a wild ride, and whoever you were in high school was a blink, like a little blip in time.
I used to think I just want to go back to high school and like give speeches and be like, all this shit the next 4 years you guys are doing doesn't matter.
Yes.
Have fun, not too much fun.
Yeah. Yes.
Don't get thrown in jail. Graduate, C's, B's, A pluses if you really want to. Whatever.
Yeah.
Won't matter.
But in some regard, it limits what people think they're capable of. Right. Because you see all these people that you knew, and you know, and I go through it with my own life. You know, I see people that I knew years and years ago that knew me as a musician, that are just like, what are you doing? Like karate now or something? So they're like, it's like Mike, the guitarist that is now doing like karate. You know what I mean? Or vice versa. Karate. Yeah, I always say that. No disrespect to karate. I really respect it. But, and vice versa. So like, you know, the jiu-jitsu guys that I know that I know and love, you're somebody different in everybody's frame of reference of you. But you can change that as much as you want. You know what I mean? And I always tell people to think about if you packed everything up, like cut the internet off and move to a new town, like who would you be there? You know what I mean? What perception would everybody have without all this other stuff you've ever done? You know what I mean? So you could technically do that at any time. So like make the most of it. And when people get a hold of me about training and stuff like that, I think too many people have a misconception, and I would implore everybody to reach out, because you don't know what you're capable of. Everybody has this in them. if you have breath in your lungs, if you wake up every day, you have a capacity to be great. You do. And I don't mean to get like kind of woo woo with it, but if jiu-jitsu's taught me anything, it's the fact that I tell you what, when I won that fight to win fight, it was a culmination of everything I've done in the last like decade or so. And it was so big to me because I never really thought of myself as like, I'm not a good competitor. I'll never be a good competitor. And if you can prove yourself wrong, it's such a powerful tool. And I think everybody has the capacity to prove themselves wrong and to be the person they want to be.
I totally agree with that.
You just have to find the avenue and put the time in and commit to what you're doing.
Well, I think it everyone, not everybody, but a big problem is everyone is so concerned about who they are to everybody else and whatever, like you talked about your friends from high school and being locked in there. Like you have to be this certain person to everybody. And they want to be somebody else or whatever. And more than likely, those people don't really see you that way.
Yes.
Regardless.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
They barely see you at all.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, it really goes down to, and I've experienced myself, is you have to forget about your past before everybody else will.
Yes.
So, make your own destiny.
Absolutely. And even to further your point, like, and this is an entire different conversation, but like, surround yourself with people that are, help you set the standard of who you want to be. You know what I mean? And if you do that, then you can really transform yourself into whoever you want to be. I remember talking to Tony and listening to his achievements and what he's, not only achievements, because he's the type of guy that doesn't live in achievements, he lives in aspirations.
That's for sure.
It's
not about doesn't get there and stop. He just keeps on going. It's
not about what you've done. It's about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's those type of people you have to surround yourself with if you want to grow as an individual. And I think, jiu-jitsu is a small little kind of cross section of that, but it's a catalyst for growth in a lot of people. A lot of people that I've trained and that I've trained with have like, they've went on to and they win a competition, and it might not mean much to some people, but to them it's the world, and it's a level of validation that they didn't know they had, or they didn't know they were capable of.
Right.
So that maybe they were signing up for this to be, as a weight loss thing. You know what I mean? I want to get in better shape. Maybe it was something they saw on UFC and they were like, oh, I'm playing.
Yeah.
If I had $1 for everybody that signed up, there was like, I'm going to do MMA soon. I'm like, okay, well, let's at least start with jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'll say, at least I'm smart enough to know at least about myself. Like Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yes.
And MMA, I'm like, that's really badass. But I don't want to get punched in the face.
Yes.
I am good. Thank you.
MMA is not a sport that you should dabble in.
No.
Because there's going to be somebody, and you brought up Tyson, but Tyson's a great example when he says, like, when Tyson was asked if he wanted his kids to box, and he said no. And they asked him why, and he said, because you're going to run into somebody like me. Somebody with nothing to lose.
Yep.
And it's a different avenue, because as you progress to MMA, the consequences, and Joe Rogan, you bring him up a lot, but Joe Rogan says it best, where it's like, it's high level problem solving with dire consequences.
Yeah. I like that quote.
And the same can be said about jiu-jitsu, but jiu-jitsu is toned down enough where you're still getting all of the positive aspects of it.
All the problem solving without quite as much consequence.
Yes. Now, I will say, once you get to the high level of jiu-jitsu, I'll be honest with you, it's brutal. When I go and do like comp rounds with other black belts, or even the guys that push me at my gym, and everybody pushes me in a different way at my gym, but if you're going competition rounds, like, it's blood, man. It's tough, and I don't think a lot of people understand that, because they think of jiu-jitsu, like, oh, there's no striking, it's easy. You know what I mean? It's easy. And anybody that's ever trained at a gym that that goes hard. I think the expression in jiu-jitsu that's popular now is, and I'm probably butchering it, but it's everyday porrada, and it just means like every day, hard as you can go, like flat out. Not this isn't a country club. This isn't. We're not just in here hanging out. We're not going through the motions. We're getting in here, and we're trying to kill each other, and we're doing it to try to make each other better. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. But
well, it seems like it's just talking about whether it be jujitsu or
whatever your avenue is.
Know, it's your therapy.
Oh my gosh! Yes,
people find therapy in different things, or different amounts of different therapy in different things, and it kind of goes back. Like music, for instance, could be therapy and all these different things.
Yes, it still is. It still is.
Real quick, can we take a potty break?
Yeah, no.
And I said
totally.
potty.
Yes,
yeah, I do. I know how long.